Last month, Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone called on the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, to lift unfair restrictions placed on celebrating the Mass and the number of faithful allowed to gather at any one time. Since then, Mayor Breed has announced a new timeline for reopening the city, including some changes to the Mass. Joining me now to discuss this and much more, Archbishop of San Francisco, Salvatore Cordileone. Your Excellency, when last we spoke, you were allowed to celebrate Mass for only 12 people out of doors. I want to play what Mayor London Breed said about her new guidelines.
Houses of worship will be able to allow individual prayers and outdoor services for up to 50 people. And that will begin mid-September, and we'll be able to provide the specific date once we have confirmed the date and make sure that we're in touch with those various businesses with the appropriate guidelines.
Wait, so you can still only have 50 people outside? What about Mass in your cathedral? Is this acceptable to you?
First of all, what's most troubling is the words she used to open up that statement. Houses of worship will be allowed. The government has no right to allow or disallow houses of worship to worship. That right it's a natural right. It's guaranteed by the First Amendment. The government has no authority to tell us whether or not we can worship. The government has the authority to tell us what we have to do to ensure public safety when we worship. So this, to me, is the most concerning thing. The second most concerning thing is their inconsistency with following what they claim to be following the science. No, this is utterly unreasonable. Why 12? Why 50? Why 100? Why don't they allow any or allow no limit at all for street protests? Why not 1,000 if the space is large enough and the people can be 6 feet apart? They allow people to go into the parks as long as they stay 6 feet apart, which they don't always do. So why a particular number? And then the indoor service, they're speaking about goals now. The goal is 50 outdoors by mid-September. The goal is by the end of September, indoors at 25% capacity to a maximum of 25 people. Again, where's the science on this? A room that can seat 100 people is treated the same as our St. Mary's Cathedral that can seat 2,500, and that just seated. There's lots of room for people to stand up in the back. So it's at less than 1% capacity at 25 people. This makes absolutely no sense, especially when we can keep our churches safe by opening doors, opening windows, airflow, ensure the distancing, people are stationed. I've said this ad infinitum. Churches can be safer than any other indoor space.
Archbishop, how does the mayor justify permitting hundreds of people in a grocery, but no one in a cathedral for worship? And what are your options here? Have you spoken to the city?
I've had a number of conversations, but it doesn't go anywhere. I explain all of this. I explain the inconsistency of applying. I understand the principles. Well, I understand the science behind them. And I agree with the principles, but it's the inconsistency in the way that they're being applied. And they can't answer my questions. Why they're more restrictive with us than they are with others. So I've had these conversations. They don't answer the questions, and they just continue forward because they can do it. There's nobody to stop them. So we need to get creative in finding ways to witness to our faith and to show the unfairness of what they're doing, which is why we started these multiple masses in our cathedral plaza, and other parishes that have the priests to be able to do it in the space are doing the same thing. Multiple simultaneous masses to accommodate as many people as possible, but still technically in keeping with the local health order.
Wow. Now, we all know the weather in San Francisco, and I know you all are enduring fires now, but things are going to be getting cooler. These outdoor restrictions may not last much longer, we hope. Do you think you'll be able to celebrate indoors in the coming months?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. Already we've had wide variety of weather. About 3 weeks ago, this is very, very unusual in California. We had lightning storms on Sunday morning. about 3 weeks ago. Last Sunday, it was hot. It was in the 90s. It was so hot I could barely hold the chalice. I could only, when I purified, only sip the water. I couldn't take a mouthful. That's how hot it was. So we've had extremes in temperature, and when it starts, it'll stay hot here for about another month. Then yes, it will start cooling down. The rains will come in November. I don't know where it's so unpredictable. Things seem to be changing from day to day, and it's hard to know what's going to happen next.
Well, we'll keep monitoring this and stay on top of it, and I hope you
Yes.
stay in touch with us. I want to follow up on this story. I need to ask you about a movement that's been really spreading across the country. It's called Unite Our Nation, and it's working to bring the country together through the power of the Eucharist and the Rosary. It takes faith onto the streets of America. Last month, 2 Wisconsin bishops led hundreds of faithful on a Eucharistic procession through the riot-ravaged streets of Madison on the Feast of the Assumption. Now, next Saturday in New Berlin, Wisconsin, there'll be another Eucharistic procession, and in October, they expect them in Arkansas and Michigan. What is this movement? Are you planning anything like this in your diocese?
I formed a strategy committee to determine ways we can, in compliance with the law, manifest our faith. So this is certainly something that we're going to look into. It's a way of, well, unite our nation. It's uniting Catholics around our faith. This is something I think that is beginning to galvanize our people, bring them together. And the more this drags on, the more this is happening. I sense this from my people here in San Francisco. They're getting very impatient with this, that they're getting outraged. And these are people that are not inclined to be combative, but they're want to start agitating. So I formed a strategy, and we will certainly look into this. I see kind of what's happening now, what happened here in California about a year ago when there was this bill introduced to lift for the seal of confession, lift the protection of the seal of confession. When Catholics united, it didn't matter where you stood on the ecclesial or ideological or theological spectrum, Catholics all united and stopped it. This is what can happen when we unite. I also want to point out here in San Francisco that there's a petition drive that has been started in supporting my statement to the mayor to allow for Mass by the Benedict XVI Institute. People can actually go online and sign that petition at benedictinstitute.org. It's a petition supporting allowing a public worship here in San Francisco. So it's another example of how this is beginning to galvanize our people, and we need to unite and speak in solidarity and speak with one voice. Unite Our Nation is another way of doing this all throughout the nation. Yes, and we will be about this.
Archbishop, I cannot believe the courts did not give you all some, cover for this and back your claims here. It seems such an open and closed case of constitutional frustration here. They're frustrating the rights, your constitutional rights to worship. I mean, the religious expression is at the heart of who we are as a people. So, but I guess given that ruling by the courts, you're constrained. There really is very little you can do aside from publicly object and civil disobedience, I guess.
It is very constraining at this time. The courts have been inconsistent. Now, as far as I know, there hasn't been a case decided on the merits of the case. They've been, at least not at the Supreme Court level. There's been these denials of injunctions. So the perfect example of what you were talking about is the case out of Nevada, actually, the Calvary Chapel case in Nevada that sued the governor because he allowed casinos and bars to operate, but very restrictive on churches. And the church, now this wasn't deciding the case itself, but the church was denied injunctive relief. And the dissenting justices said, the point you were making and the point I've been making is that people don't have a First Amendment right to gavel in a casino or to drink in a bar. They have a First Amendment right to worship in a house of worship. So why do they put these other secular activities that are not protected by the Constitution above a fundamental right that is protected in the Constitution, with basically a founding principle of our nation? It makes absolutely no sense. So that is something that's very distressing. But apparently the courts are not unanimous on this, and I think this is something that still needs to be settled through the court system.
I agree. It needs to be litigated because the inconsistency is simply not tenable. It's just not. Archbishop, thank you. We will continue to stay on top of your case and we wish you the best. And you can find out more about Unite Our Nation and how your parish can participate at uniteournation.net.